We are here today to say that we have to protect the whistleblowers who are protecting the health and safety of the public at great cost to their lives. Many whistleblowers are bullied and end up having to go on disability, but also now we have to protect the whistleblower in a federal government who's supposed to protect those who come forward to be whistleblowers. And I would also say that this is not simply a question of the federal government, but also the state government. Cal OSHA has only 170 inspectors for 18.5 million workers. There are more fish and game inspectors in California than health and safety inspectors. So I first want to introduce the person who's really outspoken on a federal level about the issue of health and safety. I know he went public on NBC, an important report, and also on the Daily Show last night about the fact that a whistleblower who's supposed to protect whistleblowers himself becomes a target and threatened and bullied as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Darrell Whitman, and also we're going to have speakers who are going to talk about why this issue is important, not just to Darrell, but to the public and to all workers. So welcome, Darrell Whitman.
Thank you, Steve. Yay. I want to thank my union sisters and brothers for coming out and supporting me. I want to say that it's been the union who's done most to support me over the last 3.5 years. It has reminded me how important it is to have an organized workplace. Otherwise, you get isolated and you get devastated by events rather than supported by people who are standing with you. I became a whistleblower investigator in 2010, the summer of 2010, with high expectations. I heard Dr. Michael speak about the goals of the program, and I bought it. Unfortunately, in the subsequent 4.5 years, I've discovered that the talk is talked, but the walk isn't walked. There's major problems. Whistleblowers are misunderstood in many cases. These represent the first line of defense against safety and health risks in our society. The OSHA program itself is supposed to work with 22 different statutes that protect everyone from the person who cleans up your hotel room, to the waiters and the cooks in your restaurant, to the people who get the stuff off the docks for us, the railroad workers, the people in the aircraft industry and the nuclear industry, the truckers who drive on the roads. Literally about 90% of the American workforce is covered in one sense or another by one of the OSHA statutes. When they do not step up and report health and safety issues, bad things can and do happen. Just to give you an example of some of the bad things that happened because people didn't speak up, all we have to do is go back and look at 2010. There were two significant events in 2010. There was the blowout of the Deepwater Horizon rig, in which 11 workers were killed, 19 others injured. It did at least $100 billion of damage to the Gulf. People 1,000 miles away from the rig lost their businesses. It permanently damaged one of the most important ecosystems in the country. And yet that blowout was entirely predictable. As the New York Times reported, there had been numerous problems on that rig for years leading up to the explosion. So where were the workers to come forward? Where was the public agencies to step forward and prevent that blowout before it happened? They weren't there. Partly because the workers, at least half of them reported to the Times, they were afraid to come forward because they knew that they would be retaliated against. And this is the state of affairs that really puts us all at risk. We have to have workers feeling confident that they can step out and make these reports to prevent these accidents. In 2010, we had the blow up in San Bruno down here. I can remember standing in this building and seeing the pillar of smoke coming up from San Bruno and wondering what had happened. Well, it was a pipeline, a PG&E pipeline, and it ended up killing 8 people, injuring 66, destroying 38 homes. Those folks were sitting at home with no idea that they were at risk, but somebody in that system knew that there were problems with those pipelines, and subsequently, after the deaths, after the damage, we then began to find out what actually happened and what was going on. It was an incident. It was not an accident. It could have been prevented and should have been prevented. This last spring, we had an accident involving a FedEx truck that head-on a bus carrying students from Los Angeles to a day at Humboldt State University. 10 people died in that accident. As the Christian Science Monitor reported, that truck was on fire when it crossed the median of the highway. There had been several similar incidents in the months and 2 years preceding this accident that should have alerted somebody, a DOT or somewhere else, to say, we may have a problem here. Is FedEx hauling hazardous materials without a license, without training, without proper protection? Well, FedEx also lost a plane under the same circumstances when there's a fire that occurred in the plane. It burned a hole in the bottom of the plane. Well, there's a problem here, and the problem is we're not protecting whistleblowers. These folks that I've worked with over the last 4.5 years are really the cream of the crop in terms of workers. They're the ones who take the initiative to report problems, try to get them fixed before we have these incidents occur. They're great people. I've taken great inspiration from them. And when I found that this agency was abusing them, neglecting them, and ignoring them, then I had to stand up and report that. So here I am. I'm now living with my second order of removal, which is a notice that they're going to try to fire me in the last 2 years. I've had 4 very hostile disciplinary hearings. I'm sure I'm definitely persona non grata upstairs. I'm not allowed in the office anymore. I am on ice, as it were. I've been ordered not to talk about my work inside the agency. So here I am. I'm talking about my work inside the agency.
Hey!
Erin Stucki. Erin was on the NBC program, and I want him to talk a little bit about what happened to him as a whistleblower when he came to the agency.
As I had said before in my previous interview, that there's a number of issues that are going on within the Federal Aviation Administration and with Lockheed Martin. Well, thank you. And what's actually happening with Lockheed Martin is they're forcing flight service specialists to service aircraft outside of the flight plan areas and what they are certified for, in an effort for the company managers and executives to gain bonus monies. And per the Federal Aviation Regulations, it is actually said that if we do get one of those instances in the 7210.3, that we're actually to identify ourselves as a specialist outside that flight plan area, so at least that pilot then has the opportunity to more carefully mitigate their risk and accepting the help and assistance from that specialist, or to be transferred to a specialist who could appropriately help them. Also, furthermore, in the very entry of the 7110.10, which is another controlling document for the Federal Aviation Regulation and air traffic control, it says that if we do encounter an instance that is not covered by that regulation, that we as our specialist can exercise our best judgment when safety is a concern. I oftentimes found that I would be receiving pilots outside my flight plan area and was forced into servicing them, and I was told, because I am not a pilot at that particular moment in time, I'm an air traffic controller, I need to do an air traffic controller job, but I also need to be deceitful to the aviation community and not let them know that I'm not certified to help that particular aircraft. I received progressive discipline and was terminated for actually following the law. And on my termination letter, the only thing that I was fired for was failing to obey policy and procedure, which again broke Federal Aviation Regulations. Conversation with an FAA acting attorney on April 1st of 2011, he had actually told me that the FAA has not issued any kind of waiver for Lockheed Martin to be able to deviate from any Federal Aviation Regulation or enforce policies that would deviate. So from that, I was fired for obeying the law. Within Lockheed Martin, there's actually a chilled workplace environment. The other specialists were intimidated and afraid to speak up, and I was probably one of the more vocal ones, and therefore I was made an example of. And by my termination, it caused the other employees to be afraid to step up and challenge the company, where safety is definitely a concern. As I'd gone to OSHA, it took probably about 5 years, really. It was about where we're at now. And my case actually was a merit finding, and the company was advised that there would be a preliminary reinstatement with back pay and damages. However, shortly after Mr. Whitman turned in his investigation, which was very conclusive and in-depth, his RSI here at Region 9 received that file. Darrell never got the file back again, and at that particular moment in time, the RSI colluded with company attorneys to actually dismiss my case based on relevant facts that weren't even relevant to my case whatsoever. In fact, he based his dismissal of my case based on 2 articles published after I was terminated, which had no relevancy to my complaint whatsoever, and no bearing on them at all. So here we have a very broken whistleblower protection program, which in turn is protecting the company and not protecting the whistleblower.
What happens to whistleblowers is that, in fact, many of them are public workers. They're conscientious public workers who are trying to do their job at great cost to themselves. They're serving the public, and what happens is they become the problem. And they become the problem that has to be gotten rid of, and they become bullied in the workplace. And we have with us Dr. Derek Kerr, who's with Stop Workplace Bullying Group, who is a doctor who was bullied for being a whistleblower at Laguna Honda Hospital.
I'm here to thank Darrell Whitman for what he's done, for showing us why so many OSHA whistleblowers are fired, smeared, and buried. Taxpayers are funding this whistleblower program because the public supports workers who report threats to health and safety. But with this news here, we have to ask OSHA, are they being really honest? Is it true that only 2.7% of retaliation complaints are valid? Is it true that OSHA actually investigates these retaliation complaints? Is it true that OSHA protects whistleblowers? So OSHA has a lot to account for, and we're looking forward to an in-depth investigation of this problem.
Now, another person who could not be with us at this event, but may come next month, is a whistleblower named Michael Mallory. And Michael worked for EM Labs, which is owned by Test America, which is the largest testing company in the United States. And you would not think that that would be a health and safety issue, but when he was ordered to falsify tests, to do a test in 15 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds that required 5 to 10 minutes, when there are thousands of false tests being made by this company, alleged false tests, and when in fact there are many hazardous sites in San Francisco and around the country, they're called brownfield sites, that have been privatized, Superfund, privatized military toxic dump sites. And these sites are being supposedly cleaned up by developers so they can be brought back in the market. But what we learned from Mr. Mallory is that many of these tests are actually not accurate. And this company is owned by H.I.G. Capital. And Mr. Mallory went to the FBI, he's gone to the government and said, look, you've got to investigate this, because this could mean that people would get cancer at sites that have been improperly tested. It's a public issue, it's not just an issue for Mr. Mallory. So he raised that, and his case also was not handled properly, and as a matter of fact, Darrell's boss told him to falsify a report, which is a federal crime, about his case. So we have some serious issues, but joining us is Dr. Ray Tompkins from Hunters Point Bayview, and they've had issues there about falsification of tests, and he's going to talk about some of their concerns in our community here really in San Francisco about whether or not that site is safe. Welcome, Ray Tompkins.
We'd like to speak on the first. Whistleblowers need to be protected. I'm sorry, President Obama, you're an MIA. You're missing in action. When you fire and retribution is taken upon those that are doing their job, it's appalling. This also trickles down to the city and state government as well. Having served on the Navy's Remediation Advisory Board and having the EPA grant for 4 years oversee of the Superfund site, we've seen, for better and kinder words, a lot of BS, bad science being pushed out on the public. There's an issue of radiation exposure and falsification of reports over possibly a 70,000. A lot of paperwork was pushed, but yet you still let the fox guard the hen house. And when individuals speak up, they are suppressed or fired, transferred, and it's been a repeated pattern. This also takes place right now over Candlestick. The corporation Lennar is sitting up here and has failed to comply with the remediation dust plan and do the superficial job on this. They have at the gate line, at the fence line, they only have the soil, it's just covered, but back behind where you can see where the residents, it's uncovered. They had over there next to public housing, Just because you live in public housing does not mean you're not a human being and you're not entitled to clean air. The monitor was put behind a cinder block building, impeding the airflow over the monitors and giving out false readings. We have filed repeatedly, yet nothing is taking place. There are those inside city government who does not want this brought up and want to push the development of the corporation. Since we're talking roughly, maybe a long term, about a $20 billion project at Candlestick. Treasure Island is another 20, and as well as Hunters Point. People's lives are being jeopardized. Right now in San Francisco, the highest heart attack rate and stroke is in Bayview Hunters Point. Asthma rates for hospitalization is 4 times higher than the state average. In one elementary school, 85% of the babies are asthmatic. This is not by accident. We need government workers to do their job unimpeded and not be forced or in fear of retaliation for doing their job and obeying the law. We are asking that the law be obeyed, not circumvented. Thank you.
Daniel Berman is the author of a book called Death on the Job, because as a matter of fact, workers are dying on jobs, they're getting sick and they're getting ill, and it can be prevented if there's proper health and safety protection. And this book, Death on the Job, was a classic on showing how industry and insurance companies tried to prevent proper protection and also try to prevent compensation to workers who do get injured on the job and when they get sick. Daniel Berman.
It's an honor to be here and to be in the company of these people who are trying to get the law enforced the way it should be on behalf of the public, the workers, themselves. And so I feel honored to be in the presence of Darrell Whitman. I was hoping I'd run into him, and here he is, and I heard his story from his own lips and from other people. Mike Madry couldn't be here, Erin, Stucki. And so what they're doing is making it by having the courage to say no when something illegal and immoral and lethal is happening. They get up there on their hind legs and they expose it. And guess what happens to them? Even though under Section 11C3, 1 through 3 of the OSHA law, they are supposed to be protected. They are not protected. OSHA is not doing its job. And so you ask yourself, why is that possible? Well, to be honest, the president that signed the OSHA law was Richard Nixon. And it was a law, he felt he had to do something to kind of jog to the left a little bit. In late 1970, he was trying to he had a bunch of construction workers who were beating up anti-war protesters on Wall Street in early December 1970. So he said, let's sign this law. And it's not a bad law. It's a very ineffective law in many ways, but it was designed, and if you look carefully at the main duty of the law is to, what the law says is the workers shall be work in a workplace which is safe from all recognized hazards. And as time goes on, we recognize more and more hazards, but the law is not enforced. There are not enough inspectors. There's probably 1/3 as many inspectors as they have in a civilized country like Sweden or Germany or France or Norway or Denmark. And it's understood that the law is going to be violated. One thing I wanted to talk about when we're talking about whistleblowers, and by the way, I used to be a health and safety expert at the oil, chemical, and atomic workers back in the 70s and 80s, and I've done some writing on the issue and helped organize committees on safety and health around the country. By the way, there's about 20 of them which still exist. It's one of those few things that we put together, the COSH groups. In fact, there's a national coalition for committees on safety and health in Massachusetts, and you can look it up, and if you want to find out where one of these committees is, you might get some help. This is at the same time when the labor movement is almost disintegrating before our eyes, not completely. The oil workers are standing up to some of the most hazardous industries in the country, but when the OSHA law was passed, 25% of private workers were in labor unions. It was 36% in 1946. Now it's 6% nationwide. Nationwide, about 12% of all workers in unions. So people don't have any protection. So if you say, if the American Federation of Government Employees is not able to protect Darrell's job when he does his job for OSHA, which is an agency designed to protect workers, say, where are these workers who have no protection? I'm reminded of a case of Debbie Wyanecki back in the late 70s, and she was working at a shop about 6 blocks from here, a photo shop, and there was exposure to a lot of solvents, and she'd come home from work red, like she was half drunk every day, and she said, Dan, I got to do something about it. Of course, it was a non-union shop. There were about a dozen workers there. I said, Debbie, if you call in Cal OSHA, you're going to lose your job. She said, that's okay, I got another one lined up. She was a single woman, and she's a person that takes care of business. She's a nurse down at, she's a nurse down at General today. So she filed the OSHA complaint. She got fired, but she forced them to OSHA forced them to put in an enclosed area to keep the fumes away from the people. So it was a success in a certain sense, but she was not able to keep her job. And this is very typical. Another case is Becky McLean, PhD molecular biologist for Pfizer out of Connecticut. She's working to develop some kind of new, I don't know, new bug to eat bugs that are bad for us. That's about as much as I understand about the science. And so one day she worked at a different workbench. Someone worked with a microbe on her workbench. She later got sick. She was on the safety committee at Pfizer. I think it's in Deep River, Connecticut. So it's
Groton, Connecticut.
It's okay, Groton, Connecticut. Pfizer is the biggest, the wealthiest, and the most. It's the wealthiest pharmaceutical company in the world. So she asked. Pfizer said, I don't want you writing these reports and documenting this stuff on the record. And she said, well, I have to. I'm on the safety committee. Of course, it's a non-union shop. So she kept raising hell. She tried to find out what microbes she was exposed to because she was getting sick. She couldn't work sometimes for 2 or 3 weeks. She couldn't get up in the morning. Then she'd get a little better. So she was fired. So she files an 11C3 complaint with OSHA. And so the lady who was inspecting for OSHA, and this is her account, which she explained to us 3 or 4 years ago out on 3rd Street at another. The OSHA, the lady from Region 1 of OSHA that came to investigate her complaint said, you know, in 50 or 80 cases out of 100, you're going to get nowhere with this. I don't advise you filing. Just forget about it. You're going to get nowhere. Well, she's a persistent person. She took Pfizer to federal court on a whistleblower statute, which they had in Connecticut. And she, after about 2 or 3 years ago at a court, I think it was, I'm going to say April 1st. I better say April 2nd. I think it was 2012. She actually beat Pfizer out of $1.37 million. And I think after her attorney was paid off and everything else, she and her husband actually stuck $600,000 in their pocket. Now, her health is not totally restored, but she's still fighting on. And so these are the kind of people we're trying to defend. These are American heroes. These are American heroes, and we have to back them up. And if OSHA doesn't want to back them up, everyone running OSHA ought to be fired, and we should start again and get real people and real law, people with some cojones.
In Becky's case, the OSHA official actually copied her documents illegally and gave them to Pfizer. And Becky actually asked for David Michaels. She met with David Michaels to do an investigation about this incident. He refused to do that. She couldn't even get her documents back. And that's one of the issues that Darrell has been retaliated against, because he wants to give the documents and information to the people who make the complaints, which is a requirement under OSHA, that people are entitled to get their documents. Now, why wouldn't they give the documents back to them? Because they're the ones that are making the complaints. This is something we have to ask David Michaels and Thomas Perez of the Labor Department. And because if they're not enforcing the law, they have to be held accountable. And that's why we're having this rally here. But unfortunately, it's not only a problem with federal OSHA, this issue of health and safety protection, it's also a problem with California OSHA, Cal OSHA. And joining us this afternoon is Dr. Larry Rose, who's the former Director of Medical Services with Cal OSHA. Welcome, Dr. Rose.
I first want to say that it's good to have somebody like Darrell who really cares about health and safety, not only for workers, but for all of the public in the United States. Darrell is with Fed OSHA. I spent 30 years with Cal OSHA as the chief of the medical unit, and I've seen enormous changes in Cal OSHA. Now, what about the whistleblowers in California at Cal OSHA? Cal OSHA is responsible to protect whistleblowers in California, and it's in the Department of Industrial Relations, and it's the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement. Now, what do they do if they receive a whistleblower complaint? Well, let's say one of the workers, let's take an example. The Chevron huge, horrible incident that occurred about over 2 years ago now. The workers knew that Chevron was running a very dangerous workplace. The pipes were eroding through. They were putting temporary clamps on over 100 pipes. The workers knew that the particular pipe that ruptured was about to rupture. They were reporting it, not only to the management of Chevron, but to Cal OSHA. And the management did nothing, and the inspectors at Cal OSHA brushed it off. Now, there was this devastating, horrendous explosion. 20 workers had to run for their lives. It was a miracle none of them got killed. And there were 15,000 residents in Richmond that had to run to emergency rooms because of the horrible air pollution that occurred from that explosion. I bring that as an example that because workers do not report, how should I put it, very dangerous working conditions, particularly in refineries. This is changing, and I'll mention that in a minute, but they're afraid to do it. They're afraid from management. They're afraid that Cal OSHA will not give an adequate response because they were complaining to Cal OSHA inspector. Now, let's be clear about this. What if, and let's talk about, let's go out and talk about what's happening now at Cal OSHA. At Cal OSHA, there's been a coup d'etat, a taking over of Cal OSHA and the Department of Industrial Relations by a Governor Brown appointee. Her whole position now is, and she stated it many of times, she wants to work with the corporations as a partner in consultation. She doesn't want to say, I'll got you by doing any citations, any true enforcement. So she has now turned Cal OSHA into a company regulatory agency. And this is outrageous. So if a worker or whistleblower, let's say, came in with a complaint about an unsafe working place, that would affect not only that working place, but the adjacent community, there would be literally no response at Cal OSHA with the present management. And this is California. This is who Jerry Brown appointed, and I think it's outrageous. And I just want to let you know that Darrell Whitman is a model for what all of the workers at Cal OSHA, all of the inspectors, all of the legal departments should be following. They should show some real codes. Okay, thank you.
So our next speaker is Steve Ondirt. He's a ferry boat worker with the Inland Boatmen's Union and also with IWW Environmental Caucus.
So, you know, I want to talk about an OSHA case that happened a quarter century ago. In Mendocino County, a timber mill worker named Fortunato Reyes was killed. He was found dead on the job, and it turns out the reason he was found dead on the job is he got smashed between a lumber sorter and a stacker. Well, why? The answer is because it turns out his boss was putting pressure on him to move these lumber piles, move this lumber as quickly as possible. He was being threatened and harassed and called a bunch of derogatory names because he was pressing the emergency stop button too many times. But that was his job. He was following the rules. And the reason why they were putting pressure on him to not push the emergency stop button was because it was interfering with Louisiana Pacific's profits. The only reason why this case got known and got taken to OSHA was because an environmentalist defended this mill worker. But the question I have to ask is why? And, you know, we just heard about what happened at the Chevron refinery management about these corroded pipes, but management didn't listen to them. And then we had the explosion. Steel workers, that is union steel workers who work in the refinery, had to tell management about these corroded pipes, but management didn't listen to them. And then we had the explosion on August 6th, 2012. Again, the question is why? And then a couple years ago, we had a crude by rail train explode in the town of Lac-Mégantic in Quebec. This was a single employee train. The rail carriers like to claim that they can get by with reducing crew size from 2 to 1, but we just hear about a case where one employee train resulted in an accident. You know, and all these communities who don't want this stuff blowing up their towns are going around saying, we don't want this blowing up our towns, we don't want this stuff banned crude by rail, but the railroad carriers and the oil companies who are pushing this stuff through the railroad say, well, we're getting safer cars, we're going to have better regulations, and yet one of these so-called safer cars just blew up in West Virginia. Again, why? Now Darrell Whitman speaks out, you know, for doing his job and says that, you know, they're putting pressure on him at OSHA for doing his job. Again, I have to ask the question, why? I think we know the answer. The answer is that actually, you know, the corporations like to say, well, we have the most overregulated economy. You know, these free market fundamentalists are saying there's too many regulations. But if these regulations aren't being enforced, why? I think the answer is simple. Because they interfere with corporate profits. We have an economic system that's based on profits first, people last. Is OSHA serving us, the public, or are they serving the corporations and the people making the profits? I think the answer is obvious. I think the only question is why more people aren't asking why.
Serious issue of concern happening at BART. 2 people were killed in a BART train, and there are very serious health and safety concerns that we have at our transportation. Just a couple days ago, 2 people were killed on the tracks on Samtrans. And one of the things about this is that these workers themselves are being retaliated against when they make health and safety complaints. George Figueroa, who is a shop steward in ATU 1555, was fired and he got his job back, but this is not an isolated situation only among industrial workers, but also transportation workers. And joining us this afternoon is Gino Pepe. He's a former vice president of ATU 1555. Welcome, Gino.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Darrell Whitman. Thank all of you. People brought up reporting on these type of incidents and getting their situation rectified. Biggest problem following up on that. So it's a big problem just reporting the incident. The second biggest problem related to this is getting a resolution to the problem that is effective in dealing with it. 1993, a BART train operator, Jerry Alberry, walked out of a BART car at Daly City BART station and fell 40 feet to the ground. The reason he fell because there was no protective barrier on the outside of the train to stop him from falling 40 feet to the ground. Since that time, and since the incident was reported and dealt with by the National Transportation Safety Board, only that one small area where Jerry Alberry fell out of the train was rectified, was fenced off. There are at least 4 to 5, maybe more other areas at BART where similar incidents can occur. So I just want to say thank you for Darrell Whitman and thank you AFGE for standing up. But let's look also for the resolutions of these problems to really address the issue that is being raised.
You know, one of the things that Darrell was involved in doing is making determinations of merit, whether a whistleblower's case actually qualified under protection, legal protection. They call it a merit qualification. So the worker should be immediately reinstated and getting full compensation and also possible punitive damages. And they're preventing these merit determinations where workers have valid health and safety complaints. One of the issues that we've raised in the oil industry is there has not been one merit qualification, as far as we know, of any oil worker in the United States. Now, how could that be? The oil industry is a highly dangerous industry with refinery explosions, chemicals, toxins, and yet There's no case of an oil worker being retaliated against for making health and safety complaints. Either it's a safe industry or somebody's covering it up and lying. Or oil workers are afraid to make health and safety complaints. And we know that that is the fact. Workers at the BP incident were even afraid. They knew they were going to die, and some of them made their wills out and told their family, I'm going to die on this job, and I'm going to make my will out. There's nothing that can be done. Well, you know something? Something could be done. These executives and managers could be put in prison for criminal negligence. I mean, when these managers commit criminal negligence and lead to the death of workers and people in the community, they need to go to prison. That is a salutary lesson to bosses and managers, that when you kill somebody or you injure a community seriously, you're going to pay for it with some prison time. But this agency, unfortunately, does not want to do that against Lockheed Martin, against H.I.G, against PG&E, where many nuclear inspectors have been retaliated against and blackballed for raising health and safety concerns. The other issue is, we don't know how dangerous it is at these places because the workers are afraid to speak out. They're afraid to tell the truth. In nuclear facilities, nuclear power plants are over 40 years old. They're very dangerous. And yet their workers are terrified of speaking out because they're afraid they'll lose their job and never be able to work again. And that happens. It's not an isolated incident. There's a system of blacklisting. There's a system of silencing people. And we say this has to go. We need health and safety protection. We need to protect the whistleblowers, all the whistleblowers, and we need to protect Darrell, who is actually standing up and protecting the whistleblowers that are supposed to be protected by this agency. And we want to call today on David Michaels, the administrator of OSHA, and also on Thomas Perez, the Department of Labor, to do the right thing. They have to clean this agency up. They have to start enforcing the law, and they have to start protecting whistleblowers and putting these executives in jail for threatening the health and safety of not only the workers, but the public at large. And we are going to be coming back maybe next month when Michael Mallory will be coming, and we're going to be talking about why isn't the Justice Department starting to investigate H.I.G. Capital for the way Testing America is operating. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.